particular place, Inishkeel, is very important to me because my father continuously brought me out here as a small child, and he recognised that Inishkeel was a very, very important place. And earlier writers who wrote about Inishkeel, I'm talking about people writing about 70, 100 years ago, were also very specific that Inishkeel was a really magical site. So I'm sitting here, which is a very inappropriate place to sit, on the side of the altar of St. Conall Cale on Inishkeel Island in County Donegal. The cult that he belonged to was the cult of Caelan, C-A-O-L after the end, of Nenrum and County Down. Caelan was the first person to be baptised and tonsured by St. Patrick and given a staff which is called DACCHE, which means winged. And he certainly became winged because within a number of years he had an abbey in Nenrum with 450 monks. And they gradually began to spread westwards, spreading Christianity. It ended up that Conall became the abbot here on Inishkeel Island. So he was an incredibly important early ecclesiastical person. And what I like to think is that it's not that just they brought Christianity, but they brought a knowledge of a learning of Greek and Latin. And later on, Dalan Forgall became very partnered with St. Conall. And Dalan Forgall was the most important man of letters of Ireland in his time. And he died here and was buried here on Inishkeel Island. The myth is that pirates came in and cut off his head, and Conall prayed to God, and God put the head back on the rest of his body, and he was buried here in Inishkeel Island. So that when people look at the two beautiful crosses out there, local tradition would have it that St. Conall and Dalan Forgall, that they were the gravestones for Conall and Dalan. This is the most important stone on Inishkeel Island. This is an 8th century cross slab. And here I'm taking a photograph. I've taken this photograph myself in the year 1990, and you can see all the detail no more than you will see on my father's gravestone in Ardra. So you have your swan here, your swan here, you have a monk up here with a crozier, a monk down here with a crozier, and here's the most interesting part down here, where you have a chariot, a late-spoked chariot with 2 people on it and being pulled by a horse, and you're to imagine the second horse. Chariots are also seen at the base of high crosses in Lochlann McGill and in Kells. And now look at what we have at the present day, how much through climate change and so on, how much deterioration we have experienced. I mean, you can see the cross, only for I tell you, you wouldn't know that these are 2 swans. You can't see the monk on each side. Beautiful stone, but absolutely being destroyed by being out here on an island by coastal erosion and by climate change. It's a pity to see. You know, when I used to come out here as a child with my father, that stone, you could see it as clearly as you can see my photograph from just 35 years ago. It's sad to see. Well, this is St. Peter's Bed. Some people erroneously call it St. Conall's Bed. It's St. Peter's Bed, and it was famous for curing backache, and also it had a name for curing infertility. So a young woman who was suffering from infertility would come out here and lie on this stone, and hopefully would go on to conceive her baby. Of course, I have to mention that there's still a thurus held out to Inishkeel every year. The most interesting aspect to us nowadays is the presence on during the thurus. The eldest breastling always kept the bell of St. Conal. And this here is the bell of St. Conal, known as Barn and Conal. Called the gapped tooth bell of St. Conal. And the elder O'Breslin held the bell as I'm holding it, and he said to each pilgrim, Pian Dúsa agus Pog Dunvarnin, give me a penny and you can kiss the bell. So that's how the Breslins made their money, because they owned the bell of St. Conal. And then in later centuries, when the bell was embellished by this fantastic shrine, I think in the early medieval era around 1300 or so, this wonderful cover for the bell was made. We McGills came from Antrim. The first McGill was called DACCHE Bean and Yellow Dennis of the Goats, and he had a son who became a clergyman, and Brahar Akagul. He was ordained in Rome, and when he was in Rome he developed a ferocious fever, and he imagined during the fever that he was drinking, that he was up at a well up in Glengesh with beautiful cold water, and a young woman brought him a glass of cold water, and he drank the cold water, and with that his fever broke, and he resolved that he would come home to the Glengesh area and be a clergyman, and he spent all his life there up in the mountains at a time of great British descent, and his body was carried down here to Inishkeel, because it was said that anybody who was buried under the same clay as St. Conal would go straight to heaven. So my father, being a McGill, always revered this place. Well, my hope would be that other people coming after my generation will honour the incredible belief that earlier generations of people had in the holiness of this place. And it's terribly sad that the stones are deteriorating because of climate change, but we saw ourselves the change in 35 years. So for that reason, I think we should take the stones off the island and put up replicas which can tell the same story. But my hope is that, and one of my daughters, Eleanor, already has a great interest in following in my footsteps. So you just hope that others will do the same, because when you read back through the people from other countries who wrote about Inishkeel way back decades ago, they all treated it so reverentially, you know, so they regarded it as an incredibly sacred place. So we should, as locals, we should regard it as an incredibly sacred place to be looked after.